What's going on, guys? Dan Watson, learningcameras.com, and here I've got a brand new Panasonic LX100, and I wanted to kind of give you guys a first look and a hands-on with the camera before the full review, just in case you're considering this. Now, I am filming this with the Canon 7D Mark II, so if you're interested in that, this is the quality you're going to get, and this is with the AF on, so we'll see how that works. Now, overall, this camera is a very interesting one because it did come with a bunch of new features and things like that we haven't seen on a compact camera in this size, and so we're going to kind of take a look at some of those. There are some very, very good things in here, some interesting features. However, I'm not so sure that the sum of the parts is really going to equal a great camera all around, and you'll see what I'm talking about in this brief hands-on. But like I said, we will have the full review coming up to really give you an exact explanation of what's going on and give you some image quality, in-depth image quality analysis. But overall, you know, the camera is very well built. It does have a nice grip on here, a nice metal feeling body. It's a good size, much smaller than what we see on a lot of cameras, more like the Fuji X100. I would say it's closer to that size. It's a little bit bigger than my EOS M from Canon, which does have an APS-C sensor in it. So this is actually a micro four thirds sensor. However, you're not actually going to be using the exact full sensor. The actual frame that this camera uses is a little bit under that. So you will have a 2.2x crop, and so you're really not getting the full depth that you would get on a 4/3 sensor. However, it is still way bigger than what we would get on a 1-inch sensor, like on some Sony cameras that we have that are more similar to this in terms of size. Now, we do get something that we can't get on the EOS M, which is a nice wide aperture, f1.7 to f2.8, going from 24 millimeters all the way to 70 millimeters. And that is really where some of the revolution comes in here, because in this small body, you're able to get that nice wide aperture lens that we're not able to see on some of your bigger sensor cameras. So one of the things that you'll notice as we walk through this camera is there are some really good strengths on here. However, there are a couple weaknesses that keep those strengths from really being wow features. One is when you turn on the camera, it does boot up into 24 millimeters, and if you do want to take that to 70 millimeters, it's an electronic zoom. It's going to take about 3 to 4 seconds to get that zoom activated. Now, the good thing to that is we can control it remotely in the app. However, there are a lot of cameras like maybe the Fuji X20 or X30 that do offer manual control of that zoom, and that's going to get you much quicker operation than what I've seen on this. Now, another thing that I have noticed is that you do get this nice click wheel for your aperture. However, if you're shooting in movie mode, this is definitely going to mess you up. So it's one of those things that if you're changing the settings while in movie mode, then that's one of the things that's going to get you. You do have 1/3 stops on the aperture. However, on your shutter speed, when we use this kind of a dial, you are limited to half stop on there. You can do it via other methods, but that's going to be one downside to that. You do have some focus modes, AF, and your manual focus operations on the lens barrel, as well as this new feature which allows us to basically change our aspect ratio in the sensor. So we're not going to lose anything on the diagonal pixels because the Panasonic is not actually using the entire sensor. We're able to do that. So that's something new to that. It's kind of a payoff for having to use less of a sensor, as we do get that feature on there. Another thing new that Panasonic has done on this camera is they've implemented their new depth from defocus technology, which allows for quicker autofocus, and I must say it definitely did the job. So I'm noticing much quicker autofocus on this, almost instant right across the frame. However, this is not a touch screen, and so if you want to focus from your different points, it's going to take a little while to jog that focus point from you have 49 points on here, from one side all the way to the other. So it is something that's going to take a little bit longer. I wish they had just thrown in a touch screen and we could just tap on the area to focus, resize focus points, stuff like that we're used to on some of the touchscreen cameras, and even on the GH4, kind of a little bit of a different camera than this, as we'll find out, but something that Panasonic is well used to. Now, you do have improved ISO on this, so you can go all the way up to 25,000 ISO, which is huge. However, there's some limitations to that I've found, and that one is if you have this both in manual mode on here and you want to use auto ISO, you can do that. However, your exposure compensation dial is essentially worthless. You have no control over your exposure compensation. So I'm not exactly sure why Panasonic did that in here. It seems that if they implemented the auto ISO, there should be no reason why why your exposure compensation wouldn't work. But because of that, I essentially found it useless to use your auto ISO while shooting in manual, which can be nice. And especially when shooting video, I love using that auto ISO to be able to change my exposure remote, like if I've got the camera off like what I'm doing now, to be able to adjust for changing conditions using that auto ISO and then keep my shutter speed and my aperture where I'd like them. So you're not going to be able to do that on here if you're going to be using that exposure control. And now that we're talking about movies, let's get a couple things straight on this. When this first came out and we saw 4K recording, 1080p at 60 frames a second, if you're anything like me, the first thing that you thought was, wow, here's a mini GH4, here's my second camera, here's my remote angle, here's maybe even the GH4 quality video when I don't have the GH4 with me and I just want something a little bit smaller to take with me. It's not a GH4. This is nothing even close. The 4K video, while you do have it, it's definitely using some kind of interpolation or something like that. I am seeing artifacts on it like I wasn't on the GH4, a lot more moire. It just doesn't quite look as clean. The sharpness is there, but that's about it. So it is not quite the same. Also, you're going to lose your profile modes like your Cine D and your Cine V. So if you have a GH4 and you're using those settings on that, you're going to have a tough time matching this to those cameras. Now, you do have 4K and you do have 1080p at 60 frames a second. So this is going to be one of the best video cameras for a point and shoot style or any kind of style like this. However, it's just a little on the disappointing side that that is not going to work as I thought it would, and as probably many of you were thinking when you saw those standout 4K features. Now, another big miss for me, and probably the biggest one for video, is there is no mic input on this. All you have is your HDMI out, and that's going to be it. So for me, that means that I'm stuck with the internal mic on this, which is going to be crap. And it is on every camera, so it's nothing that Panasonic is doing wrong. But I need another mic on my camera, and I would say that's not just something that's pro. That's what I use when I'm videotaping my kids' birthday parties and things like that. So that's just a feature I would love to see on every camera, is the ability to use an external mic to get some clean, nice quality audio from a camera like this. We're not going to see that on this camera. So I do have it on cameras like my EOS M, so even for point and shoot cameras, that's a big miss for Panasonic on this one. I don't know if they were just trying to stay away from a GH4 on it, but you're not going to be able to get that. Now, another thing is we do get optical image stabilization inside of this lens, which is a nice feature to have, especially when you're shooting video. I would say two things about it. It worked extremely well when I was attempting to hold the camera as still as possible and letting the optical image stabilization do the rest for me. It really pulled up just about all the image take that I would have from my hands. However, if you're using this for video, if there's any kind of motion in it, and if you're panning or moving around or just have a little bit of judder if you're walking, I found that it was very jittery, the video that resulted from the image stabilization. I was a little bit more unsatisfied with it. So that was something to consider. You might need some kind of extra stabilization. I'm not sure why, it just looked a little bit more jittery than what I've seen from other cameras with stabilization systems in them or lenses with it built into it. Image quality for me too has been about par for the course, and once again I'm going to reserve the final judgment for the full review, but so far I have yet to be blown away by this camera like I was on, say, the Fuji X100S. Those are cameras that really did something else on the image quality more than I thought they would. This delivers for me just like any other high-end point and shoot camera. It's not to say it's bad, it's going to be among the best that you can get. However, I haven't found that stunning aspect to it yet. Now, I'm not able to take raw files yet. I'm going to try and convert those and see if I can make those TIFF, or if Adobe comes out with a converter. So keep that in mind. We're basing that on JPEGs as of now. In low light, it has been good. Once again, among the best I've seen for 1-inch sensors, and even since it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit better than that. But this is not really going to compete with your APS-C sensor, and once again it just fell short of what I've seen from Fuji and even my Canon EOS M on that scale. However, that's not really to put down the image quality on this. It's just to say that so far this hasn't been anything exceptional from image quality. You know, overall, it's not that there's anything particularly bad about this camera. It's been very, very good so far for me. It's just these little things that keep it from being a phenomenal camera. It's been clear that Panasonic really did put a lot of attention into it with a lot of these features. It looks like it's a well-engineered, well-built camera, so it's not to say that they didn't care about those. It's just those little things that slow down your shooting experience. You know, they don't complete the video quality, because if the video looks good and the audio doesn't, then who the heck cares? And it's just one of those things that if you're not going to deliver the complete package, then it just undercuts the fullness of this camera. And that's one of the things that I've noticed with this, is it doesn't seem to be great in any particular area. It does shoot 4K, it does have slow motion video, however it has these limitations that go along with that. So that's kind of a hands-on preview with it. I've been shooting with this for a couple of days, and once again I'm waiting for the full test to see the image quality in detail with raw files, and I'll reserve my final judgment for that. And you know, feel free to chime in. You might have used this camera yourself, so feel free to let me know your opinions on that. We do have filter modes. The electronic viewfinder is nice to have. They did manage to fit it in here, which is very good. You do not have a flash on this. It is an external flash that they do give you at least, but you're going to be looking at an external flash. Once again, with 25,000 ISO, we shouldn't need it as much. However, without the auto ISO implemented in the correct way, it's just a little bit more limiting onto what we can do with that. And the other thing I would say is that we do have to set both of these into auto mode. There is no mode dial. That's not a huge issue if you're using this exclusively for photos, but one thing that I found out is because there's no mode dial, there's no extra setting that we have for video. That means the only thing to go from photos to video is the record button, and that's what you hit. So if you're taking some pictures and decide you want to take some video, you have to go change all of your settings, possibly change your picture profiles, then take your video, and then go back to your previous settings for photography. So it's just a slow implementation, things that slow down my workflow, that keep me from taking pictures as soon as I open the camera, having to wait on this long zoom, things like that, that really keep this from standing out and being just an unbelievable camera for me so far. So stay tuned for the full review. This is kind of an extended hands-on, but I have had this camera with me for a couple days, so those are my opinions on it. And feel free to let me know your opinions. Feel free to let me know where I'm wrong and if I just had some over expectations for this camera. It's not cheap. I think it's like $800-900 bucks, so that's something to consider too, is if you're getting this camera, there are other things on the market that are very, very high end in close to this price range. Also too from DSLR, so something to consider. And you can hit us up on the website learningcameras.com, comment in the post. We're on Facebook, Twitter as well, at Learning Cameras. So just check out all of the information and stay tuned for the full review.